When someone dies today, grief is often something we're quietly expected to get through and move past. A few days off, a card, and then back to normal, more or less. There's a whole industry around it: closure, moving on, stages you're supposed to complete, a quiet, unspoken deadline, even if nobody says it out loud. Now go back tens of thousands of years, long before any of that language existed. No greeting cards, no bereavement leave, no language for any of it at all. Just objects, deliberately placed, left for someone tens of thousands of years later to notice and wonder about. And the evidence in the ground says something surprising. Not just a hole in the ground, something closer to a carefully composed scene. Ancient humans didn't bury the dead quickly and move on. Bodies positioned deliberately, facing specific directions. Sometimes curled in a particular pose, again and again, across unrelated burials. In some of the oldest graves ever found, they built elaborate, deliberate rituals around loss, objects arranged, not scattered, placed, not simply left behind. Archaeologists specifically look for that distinction. It's often the clearest signal that a burial was deliberate, not incidental. S16 image prompt. Scene. Parchment info card. Simple icon of a magnifying glass hovering over a small burial site, ready to examine it closely. Light parchment background. Not through diaries or letters. None exist. Through the objects themselves and how carefully they were placed. So what does the physical evidence actually show about how ancient humans grieved? Let's start with a claim that became one of the most famous and most argued about discoveries in archaeology. In the 1950s and 60s, archaeologist Ralph Solecki excavated a Neanderthal burial in Shanidar Cave, Iraq, cataloged as Shanidar IV. Soil samples from around the skeleton were analyzed by palynologist Arlette Leroi-Gourhan, who found dense clusters of pollen from several distinct flowering plants. Species identified included yarrow, cornflower, and hollyhock, plants that don't grow naturally clustered together by accident. Several of them, notably, are plants with documented medicinal properties too, adding another layer to the debate. Her conclusion, published in 1968, became famous almost overnight. It circulated far beyond academic journals into headlines and public imagination almost instantly. Neanderthals had laid flowers with their dead. The idea spread everywhere. It became a key piece of evidence in a much bigger debate: whether Neanderthals had genuine emotional lives at all, or something closer to instinct alone. Neanderthals, long stereotyped as brutish, apparently held funerals with real tenderness. It made its way into textbooks, documentaries, museum exhibits, treated for decades as settled fact. Sometimes even shortened simply to the flower burial, as if the debate had never happened at all. So is that definitely what happened? Not so fast. In 1999, researcher Jeffrey Sommer re-examined the evidence and raised a serious challenge. 3 decades after the original claim first made headlines, long enough for entirely new methods and questions to be applied to the same original data, he pointed out that a burrowing rodent called the Persian jurd is common in that exact region, a detail the original 1968 excavation notes hadn't fully accounted for. Known for collecting seeds and flowers underground, sometimes directly through old grave sites, the pollen clusters, he argued, might not be a funeral gift at all. They might be a rodent's pantry. The tunnels ran through precisely the right layer of soil to explain the clusters without any human involvement at all. Decades later, archaeologists still don't fully agree. More recent studies using more advanced analysis have offered arguments on both sides since. It's become something of a teaching example in its own right. how a single exciting finding gets tested, questioned, and refined over time, which is the honest version of most surprising ancient discoveries. The physical evidence is real. What it definitely means is still argued over. Good archaeology sometimes means sitting with an honest, "we're not sure," rather than picking the more exciting answer. Some other grave sites leave far less room for doubt. At Sungir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered a roughly 34,000-year-old burial containing two children buried head to head. Around their bodies, thousands of carefully carved ivory beads, roughly 10,000 of them by some estimates, sewn originally onto clothing that has long since decayed, estimated to have taken thousands of hours of skilled labor to produce. Spears made of straightened mammoth tusk, fox-tooth pendants, requiring dozens of foxes hunted and processed just for their teeth alone. Small carved ivory animal figures were placed among the beads too, each one clearly the product of real artistic skill. Ivory carvings. This wasn't rushed, simply gathering and shaping that many ivory beads likely took weeks of continuous, focused effort from multiple people. It wasn't practical. None of these materials went to clothing, tools, or trade goods that could help the living survive the winter. And this happened during a genuinely brutal Ice Age winter, when every material and every hour was otherwise precious. None of it helped anyone survive. It represented an enormous investment of a small community's time and skill. In a group this small, that kind of labor commitment would have been felt by everyone, not just the immediate family, spent entirely on people who were already gone. Someone sat and carved each one of those thousands of beads by hand, one at a time, with no practical reward waiting at the end. Thousands of kilometers away in what's now southeastern Australia, another pattern shows up again and again. At Lake Mungo, archaeologist Jim Bowler documented a roughly 40,000-year-old burial known as Mungo Lady and later Mungo Man. Mungo Man's remains were found deliberately covered in red ochre pigment, among the oldest known ritual burials found anywhere on the planet. Mungo Lady's remains, found first, showed evidence of deliberate cremation, a different but equally deliberate treatment of the dead, carried from a source many kilometers away. Someone made that entire round trip specifically for this one purpose. Red ochre burial wasn't unique to this one site. It shows up across burials on nearly every continent, spanning tens of thousands of years, suggesting some shared, deliberate meaning attached to that specific color at that specific moment. Populations separated by oceans with no contact with each other apparently arrived at the same specific gesture on their own. No one knows for certain exactly what the color meant to them, only that it clearly meant something, deliberately chosen again and again. So does modern grief support finally have this figured out in a way ancient rituals couldn't? Not exactly. For decades, a popular model suggested grief moved through fixed stages, ending in something like acceptance and letting go. Originally proposed by psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969, and widely popularized well beyond its original intent. Her original research actually focused on people facing their own terminal illness, not grieving survivors at all, a detail often lost in translation. In 1996, researchers Dennis Klass, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman published a different model called Continuing Bonds. Their research suggested that maintaining an ongoing connection with someone who died, talking to them, keeping objects that belonged to them, marking their memory regularly, not hidden away out of embarrassment, but kept visibly as an ongoing part of daily life, wasn't a failure to move on. Setting a place at the table on an anniversary, talking through a decision out loud to someone no longer there to answer, It was a healthy, common part of how grief actually works. Grief, in this view, isn't a door you eventually walk all the way through and close behind you. Beads carved by hand for weeks, red pigment carried for miles, possibly flowers still debated after 70 years. None of it was necessary for survival. All of it said the same thing across tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles. Someone here mattered, and their absence deserved more than silence. The materials changed completely: ivory, ochre, maybe petals, now flowers from a shop, a photograph, a quiet visit on the right date. S99 image prompt. Scene. Parchment info card. Simple icon of a hand reaching across a vast timeline gap to gently touch another hand on the other side. Light parchment background. Two hands tens of thousands of years apart, doing the exact same quiet thing. The underlying impulse never really changed at all. We're still, in our own way, trying to say the exact same thing.